hazard and compensatory mitigation, and essentially what we're trying to do is build the bridge. We're not here to criticize one program or another, or what we're looking at is how, at the end of the day, both programs, hazard mitigation, especially if you're using nature-based solutions, and compensatory mitigation, do the same thing. They restore wetland and other natural environments for the benefit of humans and the ecosystem, and provide important ecosystem benefits. So the presentation today is really looking at how we can kind of come across the divide between those two worlds. Most people that I know in hazard mitigation are very siloed and working in hazard mitigation through FEMA. A lot of that is after the fact. It's grant money that often flows through municipalities and public sources. And of course, the mitigation banking industry is mostly privately funded sources that are doing and investing in private restoration to provide compensatory offsets. And of course, that is after going through the process of elimination and reduction and meeting the first part of the rule to minimize wetland impacts, and then what is needed to be offset is then offset through purchase of a credit. So these are two very important methods for funding and advancing ecological restoration. And we are really at a place in a time with the challenges of climate change, with what we are seeing with more frequent flood events where, statistically, a 100-year event is certainly happening more often, with changes in landscape that have resulted in increased volumes. There's no doubt that we are in dire need of getting projects in the ground, and getting projects in the ground through both private and public funding sources. So I'm going to take a few minutes and introduce the panel. To my left is Janet Riley. She's from headquarters in FEMA. Janet is currently the acting branch chief for the Community Infrastructure Resilience Branch in the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Division at FEMA headquarters. Janet works with partners across FEMA headquarters, regions, and field offices to develop and coordinate hazard mitigation policy, communication, and trainings. Janet also works across FEMA and with interagency and nonprofit partners to produce or to promote nature-based solutions and climate change resiliency across programs. Janet has been with FEMA for 5 years and previously worked on environmental and ocean policy with the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. She is a geomorphologist and coastal scientist with an MS in Marine Resource Management from Oregon State University and a BA in Environmental Science from Connecticut College. So Kathleen Bruchet is from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm just going to put a plug in here. The ERDC, and particularly the Engineering with Nature program, I am supremely impressed by the materials that have been coming out of that. And Dr. Todd Bridges was one of the people that really spearheaded the Engineering with Nature. And that was really bringing to a large scale the use of nature-based solutions. So Dr. Bruchet is a coastal geologist with the U.S. Coastal and Hydraulics Laboratory. She's a deputy program manager of the National Regional Sediment Management Program. So any of you that might ever be interested in beneficial use of dredge materials might want to talk to Kathleen or Katie after the program. She assists the program manager in working with the USACE Research, Development, and Technology programs, districts, stakeholders, and partners to improve the management and use of sediments across inland and estuarine projects and systems, coastal, inland, and estuarine. RSM and EWN are collaborative efforts implementing sustainable solutions to increase economic, environmental, and social benefits nationwide. Katie received her bachelor's degree in 2007 from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and the State University in Geosciences, emphasizing both geology and earth science education. She completed her master's and doctor of philosophy in coastal geology from the University of South Florida. Oh, USF. Yeah. Oh, you're a bull. In 2011 and 2014, respectively. That's where I did my graduate work. So.
Nice.
But I'm not a bull. I don't know. I never identified with that.
Same. I'm a hookie through and through.
Jean, Jean Cohen is from the Water Institute. If any of you know the Water Institute, they are an NGO. They're on the Gulf Coast in Louisiana, and they do incredible amount of good work and research, often helping both public and private partners. She's a senior project manager, and she brings more than 35 years of experience in coastal science and project management. After 15 years of working on applied research at marine science laboratories, Jean worked at the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources as a coastal scientist during a pivotal time in Louisiana's coastal work from 2002 to 2007. So she was a big part, an instrumental part in the state's first comprehensive master plan for a sustainable coast. And I know Texas has followed and done the same thing, and hopefully Florida will as well. In 2007, Cohen moved to NOAA, where she spent 9 years as a marine habitat resource specialist working on natural resources damage assessment and restoration until May 2016. She was part of the leadership that developed the Deepwater Horizon oil spill programmatic damage assessment and restoration plan. And as many of you know, a lot of that money is still being put out, and projects are still being implemented today. So she became the director of the ecosystem restoration programs for the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Council, where she led the development of programmatic documents. And at this point now in her career, she is with the Water Institute, who helps decision makers figure out how to best deal with these resiliency and coastal issues. So Christy Maurer, she's from CEC, and Christy and Aaron both kind of represent, Jean's kind of the bridge between the public and the private, so we have Aaron and Christy representing the private sector. So Christy is a consultant with CEC. She has over 23 years of experience. She's currently serving as a principal ecologist within CEC's Ecological Service practice. She specializes in aquatic resource restoration and compensatory mitigation, applying natural channel design, low-tech process-based restoration, stage zero, and floodplain restoration techniques across the country. As a certified ecological restoration practitioner, or CERP, she's also a certified ecologist and certified fisheries professional, CIFP. Christy leads ecosystem designs out of Pittsburgh, PA, while supporting other ecosystem restoration projects across CEC's nationwide footprint. And last but certainly not least is Mr. Landry. He is a graduate of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, so he's homegrown Cajun and seen a lot of the Gulf Coast and what can happen. Upon graduation, he spent 14 years in an environmental survey company, and he worked his way up from ecological scientist to manager of the environmental and regulatory department. During his tenure there, he gained experience with wetland impact permitting and saw firsthand what challenges developers are facing regarding the permitting process and wetland mitigation needs. In 2016, he joined J&B Companies, which is the parent company of Southern States Land and Timber, to develop and permit new wetland banks across Louisiana, Texas, and Florida. In 2023, he was promoted to the Director of Environmental Services, where he now oversees all new mitigation evaluations, development, permitting, compliance, and sales. So we have experienced and very seasoned professionals here who have both lived implementing these projects and understanding the challenges in which we face. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and let Janin start with her brief presentation.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna try to get up and move around a little bit here, just so I'm not beholden to the table. Great, well thanks so much. Yeah, I'm Janin Riley, I'm from FEMA headquarters. This is definitely a newer audience for me, and I think a newer audience for FEMA, so really happy to be here just to talk a little bit about our hazard mitigation assistance programs and how we're expanding into the nature-based solutions space a lot more than maybe we historically were. So we have a lot of different grant programs, and we definitely encourage hazard mitigation planning and action through all of our grant programs. I really think about it as a buffet. We have a buffet of different grant programs. They each have a slightly different flavor and character as to when they can be used and when the funding becomes available. But we kind of break it into two. We have our disaster cycle grant program, so that's funding that's only made available with some connection to a presidential declared disaster, or a fire mitigation assistance grant, FMAG, if you're familiar with that, and then our annual grant cycle programs. So I won't go into a ton of detail about these today, but under all of these different programs, nature-based solutions are eligible project types. So they actually have always been allowed, but we never explicitly said that before until more recently with our newest grant program, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, which is, let me see if I can find the point. Oop, find the pointer.
Bottom.
Bottom one,
Yeah,
this guy?
yeah.
Oop, no, I went back too far.
Yeah.
Sorry. This one, BRIC, that's the one you might have heard a lot about. It's our newest grant program. It essentially replaced our pre-disaster mitigation program, and one of the BRIC program priorities is incorporating nature-based solutions into projects. So that's been kind of the tip of the spear for FEMA to really enter the nature-based solutions space in a much more deliberate way. And so one of the reasons I think that FEMA has increasingly been a partner of interest in this space is the increasing amount of funding that we have available. So given our current climate, we certainly have a lot of money that's going out the door through our mitigation grant programs. Some of that, of course, is due to the climate of very frequent and intense disasters that we're in. So you can see the majority of our funding is coming out of those post-disaster programs. So our hazard mitigation grant program, and also our public assistance mitigation grant program. So this is just one example from last year where we had almost $2 billion in hazard mitigation funding go out the door. And again, we're seeing increase in some of the amounts of this post-disaster and also our pre-disaster, our annual program. So BRIC has gotten a lot of attention this year because we had over $2 billion available in BRIC for this year. We haven't announced those awards yet, but it should be coming in the next couple months. So it's a really exciting time for us to be seeing a lot more opportunity in our mitigation space. And then increasingly, we are promoting nature-based solutions as a really great option for mitigation through our programs. So all of our hazard mitigation programs, as the name suggests, do have to have hazard mitigation at the focus or reduce risk to human life and property. So they can't be explicitly for ecological restoration or wetland restoration. They have to have that risk reduction first and foremost, but we can incorporate those other environmental benefits, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on the panel. But FEMA does have a definition for nature-based solutions, and increasingly we're trying to come out with new resources. We have a couple things that have come out recently that I'll talk about a little bit more. But again, sort of across the board, we are building our efforts to be able to include nature-based solutions into our grant programs. We've made some changes in our benefit cost analysis, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And like I said, it's also a program priority for BRIC, so you get additional points in your applications if you're incorporating nature-based solutions. So it makes our projects more competitive. These are two resources that we've come out with in the last couple years. Actually, the one on the right just came out like 2 weeks ago. So these are just sort of resource guides for our communities in the hazard mitigation risk reduction space to start thinking about nature-based solutions. I think a lot of sort of traditional emergency management and hazard mitigation folks in our field, think about hardening infrastructure, adding storm shutters, upgrading materials, adding generators. So shifting towards thinking about nature-based solutions can be very different and a very big change for some of our communities. So we have this first guide, a guide for local communities that just explains nature-based solutions at different scales and scopes. And then this new one, Strategies for Success, kind of breaks down some different steps you can take to start building a team, getting interest in the community, scoping projects. So these are available online at FEMA.gov if you want to take a look. And I think that's it for me. And we're going to have a chance to talk a lot more later, and I'll pass it on to Katie.
Yeah, and I'll try not to trip and fall. All right. I'll wait for the slides to come up. But as I'm waiting for the slides to come up, so my name is Katie Bruchet, as mentioned. However, about 7 months ago, I switched jobs. So I actually work for the South Atlantic Division now, based out of Atlanta. So what's really cool about that is that I get to take all of my experiences as program manager for RSM and working with the Engineering with Nature program, and actually get to apply them to some of our projects within our South Atlantic Division. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the Engineering with Nature program, and now I've got to figure out how this works. Okay. All right. So The loss of our natural features, it represents billions of dollars in lost value in terms of environmental needs, social needs, economic needs. And our the public and our partnerships and stakeholders are really interested in incorporating more nature-based solutions into our projects at the core. And so in order to kind of help facilitate that, the Engineering with Nature program was born. It started out in 2010. Dr. Todd Bridges has, probably most of you have heard the name before. Happily retired working at UGA, though. The man will never fully retire, I promise. But he began the Engineering with Nature. It was initially an initiative in 2010, and then it officially became a program a few years ago. But the program is aimed at revolutionizing how we build and incorporate natural infrastructure into our projects. And it also is a very collaborative effort with our stakeholders and partners. So the potential impacts of the Engineering with Nature program is increased value on the order of $10 billion by 2035. That's the goal. And to also create more sustainable and resilient communities. Okay, so what is EWN? EWN is the intentional alignment of natural and engineering processes to efficiently and sustainably deliver economic, environmental, and social benefits through collaboration. A lot of buzzwords there, but so what does it really mean? So what we're doing is we're trying to utilize natural processes to maximize benefits in our projects. And in doing so and coming up with these different alternatives and these different projects, we're collaborating with our stakeholders and partners to create and come up with different ideas about how best to do this. One such example of an Engineering with Nature project is the Horseshoe Bend Island in the Atchafalaya River in Louisiana. And essentially what we were doing here was they were dredging the channel for navigation, and they were putting the material back into the channel and allowing the natural processes of the currents actually move the sediment to a different location and create essentially an island. As that island grew, with more and more sediment being thrown into the thalweg of the channel, it became large enough to actually create bird habitat. So this is a really successful project that exemplifies engineering with nature. It's won several awards, so there's a lot of information out there if you're more interested in the specifics of this. To help sort of facilitate and push the envelope for our status quo, we've established in the core proving grounds, Engineering with Nature proving grounds. So we have 6 districts that you can see over there. I just realized those acronyms mean nothing to you, so I'll try to read them off. So SWD is Galveston, NAB is Baltimore, NAP is Philly District, SAM is Mobile District, SPN is San Francisco, and MBS is St. Louis. So those are the different districts, and then 2 divisions, SPD, which is the South Pacific Division, and SAD, which I'm very proud to say is the South Atlantic Division. We are now the newest Engineering with Nature proving ground. And so the idea here is that, as proving grounds, what we're really trying to do is to push forward nature-based solutions as potential alternatives for our projects, and really kind of push the envelope for the status quo. So I know at SAD, my commander is super supportive of us trying to come up with more innovative nature-based infrastructure type of projects. So. And then lastly, I'll just leave this up here. I'm not going to read it specifically, but our Chief of Engineers, General Spellman, is incredibly supportive of the Engineering with Nature program. And so I don't think it's going anywhere. So, and we constantly get told by Congress and others that Engineering with Nature, nature-based solutions, that is what we want to be doing. And so I just think that we're going to be doing more and more engineering with nature and nature-based solutions in our future. So, all right.
Thanks. Now, which is the advanced button?
That one.
All right. So while the slides are coming up, I'll just say it's great to be here. Thanks so much, Pam, for putting this together. I've been asked to highlight some examples of learning as we go to incorporate nature-based solutions into hazard mitigation strategies. And for this, I'm going to highlight some work that it's been policy research that the Water Institute, is led by Dr. Jordan Fishbach, has been conducting over the past couple of years or so, as funded by the Corps of Engineers EWN program, so it's kind of a nice segue here. And we've also, in addition to working with the EWN team, Rand Corporation was a part of this work, the Institute for Resilient Infrastructure Systems at the University of Georgia, which is where Todd Bridges went, and several other supporting stakeholders in and outside of the Corps of Engineers. So the study that was funded by the Corps of Engineers Engineering with Nature program is called Enhancing Benefits Evaluation for Water Resources Projects. And the purpose was twofold. One, to investigate how nature-based solutions have previously been evaluated in Corps planning studies. And two, to consider what steps could be taken to better support the consideration of economic, environmental, and social benefits into these projects. So the study had 4 key steps that are shown here, but I'm just going to do a quick summary. First, the team conducted an analysis of historic and current policies and practices within the Corps of Engineers, including the role of nature-based solutions. The team also reviewed planning frameworks and alternative valuation methods that could broaden the evaluation of benefits. And then finally, the team selected 6 historic feasibility studies to reanalyze using some updated methods that look beyond the current policies constraints to capture a wider range of benefits. So the findings are organized as you see on the slide. And from those findings, we identified several opportunities to accelerate the consideration of nature-based solutions into the feasibility studies. So first, at the study scoping phase, it was found that scoping within separate mission areas limits the nature-based solution opportunities. That carries forward into the alternatives analysis phase. So if the focus is on a single mission area, such as hazard mitigation, then the range of alternatives and ultimately the selected plan tends to be limited in scope. At the evaluation stage, limitations in the tools and the methodologies used by the study teams to evaluate and incorporate non-monetized benefits relative to the monetized benefits often limits the consideration of nature-based solutions into the plan selection. And then with respect to ecosystem service valuation, additional guidance, resources, and tools could be developed to monetize a broader range of ecosystem service benefits to allow for a broader evaluation of nature-based solutions into that benefit cost analysis. So given the constraints on data and methods, the study team found that the monetized evaluation alone was not able to fully represent the principles, values, and associated benefits from the water resources case studies that the team evaluated. And that leads to the conclusion that multi-objective analysis is necessary to capture all the benefits, whether or not the use of ecosystem service valuation is ever expanded. And the state of Louisiana is, I think, a good example of managing for a range of issues that face our communities. Over the course of 100 years or more, the state's evolved from managing separately for the single purposes of hazard mitigation or flood mitigation against ecosystem restoration. And ultimately has integrated these missions under one umbrella of a sustainable coast. And the effectiveness of the proposed actions against these multiple goals and objectives that show up here are evaluated using the best available science that has been incorporated into a series of models. And I raise this because it does have relevance to one of the case studies that the team evaluated in the study I just mentioned. And that's the Southwest Coastal Louisiana feasibility study. This study was intended to address both coastal storm risk management and ecosystem restoration goals, and it was conducted in parallel to the state of Louisiana's master planning process. So given the overlap in geography and scope, we were able to leverage simulation results from the master plan process to estimate several new categories of benefit that could have been and that could be considered in this Corps of Engineers feasibility study. In particular, one was the monetized ecosystem service valuation of wetland creation or preservation, and the second was benefits from carbon sequestration of the wetlands in this area. And this is an area that the Water Institute is continuing to evaluate and build out some research on. So in this case study, we found that the monetized ecosystem benefits exceeded the ecosystem restoration cost under some assumptions, but not all the assumptions. But when the benefits were combined between risk reduction and ecosystem restoration, the benefits exceeded the combined project cost by at least a 2-to-1 ratio. So in terms of next steps, I'm losing my mind. Sorry about that. Sorry if I just like killed your ears. The study team is in the process of conducting additional analyses using the same set of 6 case studies that we started with, and specifically considering social outcomes and equity as part of the overall study process and benefit cost analysis. We're also working with the Corps of Engineers, EWN practitioners to evaluate in more detail the challenges and opportunities associated with incorporating natural and nature-based solutions into flood risk management projects. And then we're also exploring the development of a research plan that can quantify climate change mitigation potential, i.e. carbon sequestration, on habitats with the current focus on DoD lands. So with that, I'm gonna pause and hand it over to Christy.
All right, bear with me. I have cough drops and water. Allergies are kicking my butt here this week. So coming from the north down to the south has been rough. But yeah, we're gonna switch gears a little bit. Instead of talking about all what hazard mitigation is, nature-based solutions, Pam wanted me to give a case example, a study, but she only gave me like 3 slides. So I'm gonna try to get through this as fast as I can here, and just kind of give you a quick overview.
3 to 5.
3 to 5. Well, I did sneak a couple extra pictures in there. So we have a project up in Wisconsin. It's right on the shoreline of Lake Michigan. So I thought what I'd do is just give you a couple little fun facts about Lake Michigan. It's the 2nd largest Great Lake that we have here. And what most may not know is that it's the only Great Lake fully in the United States. All the other 4 lakes are shared between Canada and the United States. Another fun fact that I wasn't aware of, that it's actually the largest lake per area in any continent. So doesn't seem right, but that's what Wikipedia says, so that's what I'm telling you. So why is Lake Michigan important? So it's shared by 4 different states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana. And as we know, with climate change, everything going on, increasing temperatures, water is an asset to all of us, especially these states. The surrounding states use the water for drinking water. They use it for recreation. We're starting to see loss in water levels with the lake. So it's really important that we're really paying attention to what's going on with these lakes. And it's amazing to me that we're seeing so many different nonprofits, so many different groups that really care about these resources. So, you know, I've been working for over 20 some years, and to see these kind of groups come up, nonprofits that are really focusing on not only just the environment, but also what's important to humans, so that we have good quality of life and balance between the ecosystems. So there's several of these organizations. They all have similar missions, similar values, and that's sustaining that ecosystem, biodiversity, human health, since we all use the water for drinking, recreation, and of course, resiliency to climate change, which is what I talked about. Again, we want to provide safe and healthy communities. So these organizations are pretty awesome, and I'm sure I missed a bunch, but these are some of the top ones that we look at and we look to up in the north. So here's our project. It's called the Afterglow Farm. There are 2 very large ravines that drain straight into the lake. So it's super cool. For those of you that are up north, you're used to mountain streams, high gradient streams. That's what these look like you're hiking in West Virginia when you're in these ravines. And then you come down and it looks like the ocean. It's, you know, Lake Michigan's a very green, aqua blue type of color, and it drains right into the lake. But that means there's a lot of sediments, a lot of nutrients also draining into the lake. So these 2 particular ravines have probably at least 10 different dams, historic dams on the ravine, and they're all pretty much in bad shape. So we've been working with this landowner to figure out, do we want to restore the dams? Do we want to remove the dams? So we went through that whole process with them. Kind of summarize again what I said. You'll see tons of erosion through all these dams. The stream is completely incised now. We're having pounds and pounds of sediment come off these banks, which are going directly into Lake Michigan. So again, that affects water quality, nutrients in the lake, which is going to hurt our fisheries, drinking water, recreation for humans. The biggest thing that I was kind of surprised on was the amount of like trees and lack of canopy cover, because we had these historic, almost like pond environments. Now that the dams broke, now we have all this lateral incision in a high gradient situation because it's all filled with sediment. So now we have this lateral channel going through this old dam area, and it's trees tried to grow in it, but then it's moving laterally, so then all the trees fall down. And then we have a combination of wet trees, which like wet water, and then upland trees, and the upland trees just aren't doing good in the wet conditions and vice versa, and the whole valley was just full of trees. So from a climate perspective, that's not helping temperature, that's not helping what's going into the lake, and we're increasing water temperatures because of that, not just in this stream, but down valley. Obviously, because of both the trees and the dams, we have fish migration and fish barriers going the whole way up. There's a lot of anadromous fish in Lake Michigan. We got coho and salmon and trout. There is no bedform diversity throughout these streams. There's no pools. There's nowhere for these guys to go to actually reproduce. So what are the next steps? So stakeholders, we have our landowner, who is thankfully a billion-dollar old Milwaukee type of landowner that just wants to fix this. They want nature back. They want to walk through the trails. That's that component of nature base and trying to help humans and enjoy what we have out there in our ecosystem. Also, we're trying to lobby a lot of those nonprofit groups. So in order to go after some of these grants that those companies have, the Great Lakes Initiative, Funds of Lake Michigan, we need a nonprofit. Thankfully, in this area, in the headwaters, we have a migratory bird preserve, and that's all part of the initiative. It's that full ecosystem, trying to get migratory birds to this area. So that's the next steps, but we had a lot of education to do with the landowner. So what I mentioned earlier, it was like the question was, do we restore the dams, do we take them down? So what we did is we did a full 2D analysis, and we looked at, what if we do restore the dams that are the whole way through here? And as you could tell with like the red and the orange and some of those deeper colors, that means there's high shear stress. So that means it really doesn't matter. This is a post-dam restoration scenario. Really doesn't matter if we restore those dams. We're still going to have shear stress. There's a lot of issues going on with that ravine. So this really kind of helped tell the story for them that confirmed they don't want to put those dams back. They just want to restore everything, which leads us into how do we help Lake Michigan. But it was a big education process, not just for the landowner. We're going to have the same thing with our nonprofits and with our regulatory agencies. So what we thought we would do is do something kind of cool. We use AutoCAD Civil 3D, and we designed a conceptual stream through this valley, and we used 3D rendering to put together a virtual video to show the landowner. And I'm going to show this video real quick, and I'll give a little bit of narration as we go through it, if it works. All right, so this is what we presented to the landowner. It turned out really cool. It's only a minute. I know I'm probably going over, Pam. Don't yell at me.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, here's our stream going down through the valley. You'll see right upstream from the bridge is where an old dam is, so we're going to remove that dam. They wanted a footbridge because they want to walk through. Looks like our music isn't working. There's really cool music with this. But anyway, so we restored the dam. We're going to have that valley back. This is like post-restoration, so we don't have all the trees planted yet. We don't have all the canopy there, but this shows a really good example of some of the structures we're going to put in. We could get really fancy with these renderings, these virtual videos, but it gives them a conceptual idea of what we're doing. The landowner is all about nature. She wants past going through these to walk. She's, 70-some years old and just wants to see things back to the way it was. We tried to get wolves in there, but you had to pay extra for wolves, so instead we got goats. So just adjacent to the big ravine is a big whole field that they're using for agriculture right now, but it gets too wet. There is a whole network of drainage tiles. So what we're going to do in this area also is remove all that drainage area and get wetlands back. And that's really going to tie that whole story together with the migratory birds. Same thing here, bald eagles were expensive, so we had to use a pigeon.
He was a passenger pigeon.
Yeah. But this was like totally awesome. It wasn't that expensive to do. Landowner was almost in tears after she watched this, and it really sealed the deal. You know, so things like this is just getting creative, innovative. How do we sell these projects when we're talking all these crazy acronyms? What is restoration? What we're trying to do when we're talking to people that don't know anything about what we do? Let's show them what we do. So this went a long way. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Got your go. Here's the clicker.
This on? Okay.
Do you need 3 hands?
So, test. Y'all put me on after a video like that. There's no way I'm gonna be able to live up to that. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. My name's Aaron Landry again. Work for Mangrove Point is a mitigation bank that's owned by Southern States Land and Timber. It's a J&B company. It's a family business that's professionally ran. It's over 145 years old company, but about 12 years ago we got into wetland mitigation banking. So the project that I want to talk about today is located here in Florida. It's located on Tampa Bay. We didn't develop this project. It was developed by others. We acquired it whenever it was permitted. But we did manage the construction of the work that took place, and now we're working on the monitoring of the project ourselves. We had a lot of great members that came together to do this project. Aquatech, Biotech, Green Source, all companies represented here at this conference. And it took a long time for this project to be permitted, and it was a large effort to be able to build it. Let me see, where's this? To give you an idea, if you're not from here, the site pretty much was drained by, or was impacted by mosquito ditching. If you're not familiar with that, that's basically where they went in a long time ago and dug canals across the mangroves to be able to bring in mosquito fish, to be able to try to control mosquitoes in the environment a long time ago. And so now you just have a whole bunch of cut canals all through the mangroves, and you have a whole bunch of spoil placed along the canals. And the project basically was to go in and some of the spoils, we hydroblasted them to be able to bring them back down to the elevation conducive for mangroves to grow back on those areas as opposed to upland spoil piles. And then there was also some areas that we mechanically, if the material was too much, it was mechanically backfilled back into the canals. That way we were able to restore both the open water area and the spoil area back to mangrove elevations. So the project as a whole, you'll see it has some components. You start with the open water, you have a seagrass section, and then you have a lot of the mangrove restoration, and then there's also the salt turn portion of the property and marsh portion of the project. And I guess for the point of today, what we wanted to point out was just as you move upslope across the landscape is where you basically have a cross section. You can visualize that as a cross section, and we're talking about resiliency and sea level rise, and hopefully it's not necessary, but we wanted to demonstrate a project where that if there is sea level rise, where the project could move, the wetland habitat boundaries could move with that, and it has the space, it has the wiggle room to be able to move upslope as you have up gradient from the mangroves towards the salt turn, towards the marsh. Ideally, a project like this would also have an upland component where you would have the ability to be able to move into that direction. This one was a little too tight for that, but that's kind of the intention. A lot of our projects, we have that slope upwards ability in a project. So, and then another big picture that we have, so we want to demonstrate, again, building a bigger picture on a project. This is, so the mangrove project is in the middle here, and we just wanted to demonstrate how it is on the landscape with other conservation lands. You have some parks and preserves adjacent to the mitigation bank, and you can see how this just creates, you know, a barrier, a linear, you know, larger complex basically of protection and, you know, prevents development, and also just creates that buffer for storm surge from storms and things like that. So, so that's what I have as far as an example of a project here in Florida, and yeah, I'll try to answer any questions as we go. You want this back?
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you so much. I think you saw some fine examples of privately incentivized work and private money being put to work, and offering coastal resiliency and extra benefits. And then we heard about all the public initiatives that are going on and what the Water Institute. So I'm going to start by just asking the panel a few questions, but I want this to be a conversation, and that's why we kind of set it up the way we did, because we wanted you to feel like you could have a conversation. It wasn't the experts up here then standing behind a podium and telling you how it is. We really want this conversation because it's going to take all of us to be able to not only implement really good brick projects, but these worlds are coming together and they're crossing. So I'm very much about hands across the water and building bridges between practice areas. So that's really the intent of this. So the first question is going to be to Janin, and my question is, how is FEMA hazard mitigation policy changing to facilitate funding and or adoption of NBS proposals?
Yeah, thanks, Pam. So I'm very excited to say that we made a number of policy changes recently. And we, like just a couple weeks ago, finally updated our hazard mitigation assistance policy guide, which we hadn't updated since 2015. So that's kind of our policy tome that guides our programs. And we added a whole new nature-based solutions portion in that guide. So there's several pages. It talks about what nature-based solutions are, how you can incorporate them on different projects, different scales for different hazards. And then there's a number of resources. So like I said before, they've never not been allowed under our programs, but we hadn't explicitly called them out as eligible project types before. So this is a really big change that we certainly hope responds to some of the demand and the need that we've seen. Some of the other places where we've made changes, like I said, is through those annual grant programs. So that's where we, FEMA, have a little bit more flexibility about how to prioritize projects. So with the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, our BRIC program, incorporating nature-based solutions is one of the the program priorities. So you get additional points in your scoring and your application for including those. So that's obviously a good incentive and a big policy change for us to help see those projects come through, because it makes you more competitive. And then we also have additional points available in our flood mitigation assistance program, which is another one of our grant programs. Just has to be flood related, as you can hear from the name. And so for larger scale projects in that, for local flood risk reduction, if you have nature-based solutions, that's another way to incorporate points. So trying to incentivize those projects where we have that flexibility, and then increasingly trying to put out additional materials and update our own policy. And then we're obviously hearing that demand from community members, but also from our leadership. So incorporating and including nature-based solutions across our programs is a strategic priority for us as an agency as part of our climate change and resiliency work. So we're hearing it top down, and we're also hearing it from the bottom up. So I think that's been really good motivation for us to kind of rethink how we're doing hazard mitigation across our programs.
That's excellent. Okay, so for the core, Katie, my question to you is, so how is EWN advancing and facilitating incorporation of NBS into BCA analysis, benefit cost analysis? Because you said something very important, which was being able to monetize this. or
Correct.
maybe Jean did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jean touched on really trying to monetize the ecosystem benefits of a lot of this. So how is EWN doing this?
So Engineering with Nature is a program funded through Congress. It's its own remaining item and has been fortunate enough to receive significant amount of funding in the last couple of years from Congress. So from that funding, we are able to fund different projects, such as the project that Jean outlined. And so that work like that and how to monetize different types of environmental features, wetlands, habitat of various kinds is really important for us to incorporate into our benefit cost ratios. We've been told by Congress via Water Resources Development Act authorizations, specifically Section 125, where they would like for us to incorporate benefits into our federal standard calculations. If you're unfamiliar with the federal standard, I'm paraphrasing here. It basically says that we have to do the cheapest and most environmentally and engineering sound solution. And so anyway, but how we calculate what is the cheapest is sort of still a question mark. And so efforts like Jean's that she discussed helps us to find ways to quantify some benefits that we weren't previously able to quantify. And so we can actually get at that authorization that does give us the ability to incorporate more benefits than maybe we were considering before. And so again, the Engineering with Nature program, and also just ERDIC in general through our research area review group. It's the acronym is RARG. RARG. Anyway, through the RARG process, we identify and outline statements of need, which are basically research needs. Yeah. And so one of the research needs that has been identified numerous times by our districts and division leadership is the need to quantify benefits. And so we're not fully there yet. We're still working on it, but I'm really excited about it because similar to what Janan was saying, we hear it from the top and the bottom that, hey, we've got to find better ways to incorporate things, other benefits that we aren't considering. It's not all about the dollar signs, but unfortunately, that's sort of how you have to do the calculation, so we got to figure it out. But anyway, so it's definitely a work in progress, and certainly Engineering with Nature and our other research programs are putting a lot of funding towards answering those questions.
That's awesome. So before we go on, is there any questions from the audience? Kind of get you going, try to get things going. Yes, sir.
I guess from a FEMA perspective, could you give some tips maybe to get our local communities connected to bridge money for this solution projects?
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully everyone can hear that. The room's not that big, but how can we get local communities, keyed into some of the FEMA grant programs? So I think that's definitely been a sort of a big shift in the conversation recently is connecting, coastal communities, wetland groups, adaptation groups into that traditional emergency management community. So all of our grant programs do run at some level through the state or the tribe or territory government first. So, and they do some prioritization and selection. So even for our BRIC grants, which are a national competition, they have to go through the state first and they have to meet those eligibility criteria. So I think definitely encouraging communities to reach out to their state hazard mitigation officer, their SHMO. That's kind of the gatekeeper or the key point of connection for FEMA funding. Usually that's through the state emergency management agency. Sometimes they're housed in different places. You can look those up online for sure. But getting to understand what's required, what those timelines are, because FEMA has those are annual programs, so we have an annual grant cycle. But typically the states or tribes or territories have a much earlier application window for them to review before they're sending it up to FEMA. And so that's for BRIC and our flood mitigation assistance programs specifically. Our largest grant program, hazard mitigation grant program, is funding that's available just for the specific state after a disaster is declared. So that bucket of funding is nice because it's not nationally competitive. It's exclusive to the state where there's a disaster declaration. So in Florida right now, with the devastation from Hurricane Ian and also from Hurricane Nicole, a positive of that is a huge influx of hazard mitigation grant program funding that's available across the state. So that's again another place where the state hazard mitigation officer, usually with the governor, are setting the priorities for how that funding is being allocated across the state. But making the connection or encouraging communities to connect with the SHMO or to advocate with their state representatives for projects that they'd like to see funded is a good way to try to influence where those dollars are going.
And then you show them a virtual video.
And we've been offering a number of grant listening sessions and webinars on our website. So definitely encourage folks to take a look at what we have there. We're trying to hold more office hours and kind of informal opportunities for potential applicants or communities to drop in, ask questions, learn more, because we know our grant programs are not easy to navigate, especially to folks that are not familiar with our grant process, but we're trying to make that more approachable.
I have a question, comment, and then I'm going to pass it on, just because I got the microphone. Katie, I really appreciated your presentation because this is really timely. There about the engineering with nature. One of the big kind of, I guess, conflicts with the way a lot of mitigation programs are set up across the nation is that, particularly stream mitigation, is very form-based. It's kind of entrenched in a natural channel design, and so you get credits for having a bank that's vegetated or for number of stem counts and things like that. It doesn't really allow for the processes to happen. So if you have natural erosion or natural migration of the channel, a lot of times you're like, oh no, it just eroded my bank. Well, it's natural, but you end up having to essentially create a form and lock it in place. So there was actually just there's been a series of roundtable meetings that URBA has pulled together to discuss this and how to create better outcomes using process-based restoration for mitigation. And it's really one of the big things is like, well, how does the Army Corps of Engineers, our IRTs, or feel confident that if you're proposing what's a alternative restoration, which is accepted in regular restoration practice but not in mitigation, how does the IRT feel comfortable approving that if it's kind of this form base is sort of baked into the credit generation and the requirements and things like that. So seeing that the Army Corps has this engineering with nature program, and I'd like to take a look at that website a little bit more to see examples. That's great. It's a other area of the Army Corps that is providing those examples. So I appreciate that. I think that's going to help move the needle on introducing better, more tools, I guess, for restoration to apply to mitigation. So thank you for that presentation.
Yeah, I'll just mention, so I think it was on one of the slides because you mentioned it, so it must have been somewhere. But the website, the Engineering with Nature website, it's engineeringwithnature.org. It's got tons of examples on there. And also, one of the things that Todd is brilliant at is making really pretty, like, beautiful glossy images of these projects that are amazing. But so on the website there are 2 Engineering with Nature atlases that have examples of all kinds of engineering with nature type of projects across the world. So they're not just Army Corps built projects, they're everywhere. And so the places like the Netherlands, they're already extremely good at this type of work. So we've got a lot to learn. But anyway, so I encourage you all to go check that out and look at other examples that are out there. That was just one quick one for sure.
So can I,
Yep, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I want to add too, because this would be some information I was going to share with one of Pamela's questions she had. I have an example that I was going to point out. So here in Florida, the UMAM calculation for the credit inventory, well, if you have a mitigation bank and it's next to infrastructure, you have to put a buffer, right? If you're not next to a conservation servitude, you don't get credit for that area. So it's looked as the road next to our bank is a negative for a UMAM score because it's looked at as the road being a problem for the wetland as opposed to the wetland protecting that road. And so therefore we don't have an incentive to put our boundary up against infrastructure. Our incentive is to put it next to other conservation land. So,
Wow.
that's something that, what we're talking about today is, that's conflicting interests.
Well, and that's a good point, because many of these mitigation projects, whatever watershed, if it's a stream project, and as Christy pointed out with the Lake Michigan project, I mean, these are providing huge resilience benefits that impact the lake directly, impact use, the fish and wildlife, and all of these private projects provide those benefits as well. And now's the time, as practitioners, whether you're in the private space or you're doing it as a public restoration project, coming around and taking the efficiencies of what we learned in the private sector doing mitigation, as well as understanding the benefits of these projects for infrastructure or other built environments, there may be more and more of an opportunity to blend approaches so that we get the best of both worlds. We can effectively offset impacts, but then also help to restore or even completely put back into the landscape things that are missing, that need to be restored.
And I think just to expand on that too, Pam, is we need to keep in mind what a compensatory mitigation project is versus a hazard mitigation project or a nature-based or a grant project.
Yeah.
Those type of projects shouldn't have the same performance standards as a compensatory mitigation project. And I think it's important for us consultants and our clients to communicate that with the regulatory agencies so they're aware of that and they're not looking at it as performance standards and success standards. Just to expand though on the process-based, we have a process-based restoration project out west now. And it is compensatory based, but you had asked about success standards. A lot of things that we're doing out there is we're really focusing on, the beaver dams and generating wetlands. Out west, water is so scarce. So a lot of the goals was providing a water source, was providing a fire break so that we have huge water in between. Performance standards were the wetland delineations, and then that 2D H&H modeling. So we could do that pre and post restoration to really model the difference in inundation and flow depth, to really show that success standard of how we're increasing the water table and reconnecting that whole floodplain. And that all ties into the same stuff. So I really think that low process-based restoration, as long as it's the right tool for the right setting, is gonna work great for these, and it's truly nature-based. But there's plenty of tools in the box, and you can't just throw beaver dams in a high gradient stream. You can't just throw them where you don't have a big valley. There's a lot of tools in the box. We just got to know which tool to use in that setting.
Lee, I think, had a question.
Thank you. It's a great panel. It's very timely. So with all of the federal money that's out there right now for watershed restoration toward flood risk mitigation, and looking for best available technologies, y'all have some great studies and on the cost benefit analysis and how do we bring the value of these projects in there. They're not all finished yet, right? But whatever you do have, is that available, and can you put out draft data so that, because we're literally in projects now that we need that data, and we need it from qualified studies like you guys are conducting, right? So as soon as you get the data, I would ask that you put it out there, even in draft form, so that we can comment on it, but at least have some data to start using, because most of the FEMA and NRCS grants are really already, right, for the right reasons, asking us to use the best available science, which means looking at holistic cost and benefit, not just the direct dollar benefit. So as soon as you guys get info, please put it out there for us. And I don't know, do you have any now? Y'all can comment that a website we could go to get any data that you have?
And that was actually one of my questions for Jean. Is the Water Institute published materials or tools to assist practitioners in either implementation of NBS or how to perform maybe benefit cost analysis.
Yeah. So of the study that I did a fast drive-through on here, there are 3 reports that are already published. They start out more at the policy analysis phase of things, and then doing a methodological evaluation of tools that are available. Those 3 reports can be found on the Water Institute website. They can also be found on the Engineering with Nature website. There's a 4th report that we are so close to being done on. It should be out very, very soon. That is what we're calling the capstone report. It looks at our evaluation across all 6 of those feasibility studies, that retrospective analysis, and shows some of the ways that some additional tools could be brought to bear to try to better incorporate. But to be honest, there's still so much work to be done in this field, right? We don't have like hard numbered data sets that people could tap into and then pull into, their own evaluation. And I think the other really big important piece of this is that this is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all. What you were just saying about you can't just throw a beaver dam in a place that it's not appropriate to put that, right? We can look across, and it's so important to share our experiences with one another of projects that worked really well, projects that maybe didn't quite meet up to expectations, and why they didn't meet those expectations. Sharing that information is so important, but at the end of the day, you need to understand what's going on in your landscape, really, and so pulling data either through modeling analyses or just ground truthing what's going on out there is critically important to making sure that you're putting the right project in the right location.
And I totally agree with that. And one of the things I was going to mention is just that my personal Katie opinion, not you say wide opinion, my Katie opinion is that this is not, in order to quantify benefits, this is not going to be an equation that we can apply like in Galveston and in Jacksonville and in Baltimore. This is going to be people that are actually getting creative with how they think about different benefits that they're getting from their projects, and justifying ways to quantify it as we go. And I fully agree with you. As we do this, as we learn more, and as we push the envelope, we need to be publishing and sharing lessons learned, so that even though Baltimore is going to be a lot different than Jacksonville district, there's still things that you can learn from each other and how you think about benefits that you can incorporate into the BCR. And then one thing I was going to say too is that. Oh yeah, the international guidelines. Yeah, and that's more about the different types of NNBF and how to implement them and those sorts of things. And the other thing I was going to say is that at SAD we have a pretty unique situation where the person in our office that is in charge of the navigation program, the coastal navigation program, and also the coastal FRM program, is the same person. So when he sees that a navigation project, for example, can create FRM benefits, he does that calculation and justification in his mind, and he's able to, let's just say, he's able to incorporate the benefits from the navigation project into the the benefits from the FRM project into the navigation project when he thinks about the budget. And so that's something that is unique to SAD. Not all of the divisions are they're not all organized in the same way, which I never understood, but we're not. And so it's not the same that this person is the same person for each of the divisions. So we're pretty unique in that way. And one of the things that he encourages his navigation and FRM folks to do is to look at what we call the true cost of dredging. So when we look at whether or not we're going to do a beneficial use project or dispose of the material either upland or offshore, look at the cost that is related to maintaining an upland disposal site, right? There's a finite capacity in our disposal sites, both upland and offshore. That has a value, right? If we fill up our upland disposal sites, well, then we're going to have to raise the dikes in order to make more capacity. But what if then we could place the material back into the environment, right? And keep it in the system, right? So anyway, what we try to do at SAD, and I know that other divisions are also trying to do this, is to kind of take into account things that maybe we weren't thinking about before. So what is the cost of not doing beneficial use, in other words? So anyway, and I think there's going to be more to come on that. There's like a lot of different things you can think about. Again, me, Katie, I think about, well, you know, that material that's in the channel that we're dredging out and potentially disposing of obviously came from somewhere, right? It came from a nearby beach. And so if we take it out and dispose of it, that means that we're going to lead to erosion somewhere, right? Now we have a net loss to our sediment budget. That's going to mean erosion somewhere. That has a cost associated with it. It's not a clear cost that we can calculate very easily, but it's something to consider when we consider these projects. And so we're not there yet, but we are improving, and as we go, we will be hopefully publishing reports either through ERDIC or individual districts and divisions and so on and so forth.
So with beneficial use materials, one thing I want to point out, I mean, I know that I have looked at projects where we were considering use of Butum sediments. So I think this is something that's definitely going to be coming in the future, and to cross the world into compensatory mitigation. I'm hoping that compensatory mitigation practitioners are thinking about this, because that's another way in which you can be partnering with your districts and hopefully your regulators as well, and hopefully this and you know the nature-based solutions side of it will start to bleed into regulatory, and we might see some change in mindset as well. So I want to go to Christy and Aaron for a minute. So in what ways have you quantified or tried to quantify in terms of, because you could do it for site selection, like 33 CFR, you're justifying site selection, and resilience benefits could be a big part of justifying your site selection. So in what ways have you quantified the resilient benefits of either stream restoration or other restoration projects that you've done? And I think, Aaron, you also have a project in Louisiana where resilience was actually part of the planning of that as well.
Yeah, so there was another project that I almost brought in with this one, and I apologize, I don't have any slides, but it is in South Louisiana, right? We have our challenges. There was a project that 20 years ago or so, the parish government had come in and had put up a berm to basically keep water off of agricultural land, basically south of a pump station. Well, then we came in and we're going to do a wetland mitigation bank on the agricultural land, and so therefore we don't want that protection from the water from the flooding anymore, and so we moved that material, but then we put it on the northern boundary of our mitigation bank and basically made a east-west barrier that is now could be considered a storm surge protection south of Houma, Louisiana, and with a wetland mitigation bank built in front of it, basically. So we restored wetlands with now a physical barrier berm, along the northern boundary. So that was another project that, and look, it's admittedly, right, it's what we needed to do to be able to get our project done. But it was working with the local parish and, some of their requirements and their best interests and their challenges. And look, it costs us more to do that project. We built that berm to their engineering specs that the parish would require for any of their other projects. And again, it was one that just working with the local government and doing something that we gain back ecological restoration, and they get something that they can utilize for their big picture plans on protecting.
And hazard mitigation. Yeah, and if you go to the EWN website and look at some of those designs, they have something called a horizontal levee. And instead of just open water hitting a levee, they do a series of step-down wetland designs in front of what is then a hardened structure. So you have a berm that would, serve more of a little bit hardened structure, but in front of that now they have the whole wetland area to be able to absorb and whether it's surge or that wetland can provide the function, the hazard mitigation function, and it's serving a compensatory mitigation purpose as well to offset other wetland impacts. And this is where I want the industry to go. I really think we have to be thinking in these terms. And like Aaron said, they're good stewards. They're going to help, there's other stakeholders involved in any of these compensatory mitigation projects. And particularly, as we have to consider or may need to consider mitigation on public lands, and that's been an ongoing discussion. So this was the purpose of the panel, is to really bring these two worlds together, because they are, at the end of the day, restoration doesn't just serve one purpose that we might assign to it. In our concept mind as human beings, it actually serves a whole suite of ecosystem benefits. So why not be thinking about that from the beginning?
And societal benefits.
And societal benefits, yeah.
Yeah, just the thought that came to mind for me and and I keep coming back to Louisiana as the example. Louisiana has, out of necessity, it's really changed the way it's thinking about how to be resilient in its landscape. But it pivoted after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita from thinking about things at an individual project by project scale to thinking about the dynamic aspects of the landscape that the people are living in, working in, and this highly erosive coastline. And so they took a step back and said, okay, what do we need? What do we need to have a resilient coast? And that was this combination of hard structure, resiliency types of things for communities lifting up structures, all the way to the wetland restoration work. And the wetland restoration work for multiple purposes, both ecosystem purposes as well as the support that it provides to hazard mitigation. And then from there, the state is looking at, okay, what are the various funding sources that are out there? And from that perspective, what does each funding source need specifically in order to get that money, right? So, FEMA needs certain criteria. Okay, which of these projects that we have planned might fit a FEMA requirement? Which of these projects might fit with, unfortunately, Deepwater Horizon, money? And so that way, it's still keeping the bigger picture of what are we trying to achieve holistically, but then understanding all those individual funding sources and the individual needs. And so that's a big scale, but you can look at that in Tampa Bay. You can look at it, in smaller landscapes. If you understand what you're trying to do holistically, then breaking it down to, okay, what does this individual funding source need in order to move that money? It's just another way of thinking about it.
So are there any more questions? We've been having a great discussion up here, but I want to involve you guys as well. So anybody else have any more comments? Oh, Tim Roth does. Oh, the head of the state.
Are you afraid?
If you don't know who Tim is, he's the head of DEP, Florida DEP.
So I've got a question, and so I've struggled with this for years. What suggestions do you have to get the regulator, right, so my agency, the local government, and our Office of Emergency Management, so the kind of the FEMA equivalent, to get together to work on these projects that benefit, that have all the benefits? Because it seems like we're permitting things, we're permitting restoration, we're permitting mitigation banks, we're permitting flood protection projects, but we're not looking at them together saying, hey, how do we get all the benefits? Check all the boxes, pick the right locations that have benefits of restoration and flood protection.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab. I think there's no easy way to do that, right? And we definitely experience this at the federal government level too, where it takes more effort to coordinate across partners than to just work within our normal day-to-day networks. It seems like with the recent disasters here in Florida, there's actually been some changes in the way that Florida and especially the Emergency Management Agency are trying to do rebuilding, especially in the coastal areas. So there was a big coastal meeting in December that they had at the joint field office. I think it was before it was in Lake Mary. It was in Orlando. And they kind of had all of these federal partners on the table and state partners at the table. And your resilience officer, Wes, was there. The head of the state emergency management officer was there. Some folks from your office were there. NOAA, FEMA. And they were sort of like, what do we do to rebuild our coasts and do some restoration in a resilient way across Florida, right? Because you have this double impact of your coastlines. So I would imagine, working within kind of that resiliency umbrella as a starting point and see if you can leverage some of those connections and utilize if the state is, moving towards a state-led resilience plan. Every state has a hazard mitigation plan, and so that plan has to be updated every 5 years. And trying to get in as a partner in that update, I think, is a really great place to make those connections and then also be able to identify potential future projects that can be funded with, FEMA hazard mitigation funding. And I think we're seeing states increasingly look at that, instead of just having a hazard mitigation plan, having a coastal management plan, development plan, trying to look at integrating some of those plans so that you are doing a more holistic planning process about what types of projects you want to see and how the different agencies and partners can work together to leverage those priorities and potential funding. So it takes effort, and I think it takes some catalysts, some oftentimes individuals who are dedicated to some of those outcomes. But I think we're seeing that find a lot of success in different states, and certainly seems like Florida is kind of poised to really enter that space strategically.
And what Jean just said, I mean, Louisiana had to come through necessity, and they created the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, and then there's a bunch of legislation that goes with that. Florida's heading in the same direction. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, between Ian and Irma and stuff, Nicole, and stuff falling into the Atlantic Ocean, we are definitely heading in the same direction. So Tim, my encouragement to you and the state, and the message to maybe take back, is we need a statewide coastal planning effort where we can start to say, these are where we need projects, these are the priority areas we need projects, and then leverage private mitigation banking as well as public funding to achieve that. Because if Aaron or Christy comes in with a project and says, hey, we know you've already identified this area as in need of ecological restoration. We have an opportunity to permanent mitigation bank. It's going to be adding all of these other benefits. Then we have both of these working together, even though the purposes might be slightly different. And that's where I think leveraging, and the mitigation banking has grown into the ecological restoration industry. And that's where, I mean, there's no amount of public money that can do everything that we need to do. It's like kind of what's happening with the Florida Wildlife Corridor and that initiative, and Kay and FAMB kind of coming together with the people, the not-for-profit that's planned the Florida Wildlife Corridor and siting bank sites along that corridor. That was brilliant and excellent, and that's how we put all of this together to make a landscape scale difference and a holistic difference. So it's coming up kind of with that plan. And that's the state is the people, you guys are the people who can do that. And with all the DEP programs that you're managing, plus all the districts, putting all those people together and saying, hey, this is where we need projects. This is what we're experiencing over here. This is what we're seeing here. If we could get that statewide plan, I think that would give so much direction, and it wouldn't be so piecemeal, and maybe not even so contentious at times. It might take some of the contention out of the process, hopefully. That's what I'm hoping anyway. Not that it is. I'm not saying it is all the time, because Florida is actually really great, a very good banking state. But anyway.
I was just going to add to that, I mean, my first thought similarly was just sort of communication, right? The districts and the states that, in my experience, are the most successful in implementing EWN and RSM type projects are ones that have established interagency groups that meet regularly, whether or not there's a project going on. They're still meeting, they're still talking, they're still building trust and camaraderie, which is actually extremely important in these projects. So, nature-based solutions aren't often, I mean, most of our projects were authorized in like 1872, right? We've learned a lot since then, but nature-based solutions aren't often in the authorized projects that we build. And so in order to get them into projects, it requires a lot of effort, not just from federal agencies, but state and local agencies as well. And then, I would just say that by building these interagency and interdisciplinary groups, it allows us to be proactive rather than reactive with these types of projects. I always joke, like, you can't just like wake up one day and decide I want to do beneficial use today. And there's a big process there. So, you know, like Pam was just saying, like, if you have a plan going into it, then when there's an opportunity presents itself, say we're dredging a certain channel or whatever, you know, you already have your plan in place, and so you'll know what you want to do with the material. Now, I'm speaking more from the nature-based solution type of world and beneficial use type of world, but I think it applies across. Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge as a practitioner is the land acquisition phase.
Yes.
You know, so, you know, most of these projects, we could identify projects all over the place that need fix. The problem is trying to get the landowners on board and making sure they understand it. So there is a community piece to where we need to educate the community so they understand how beneficial these projects are and how it's going to save their land and protect their land and maybe provide fishing habitat or, you know, whatever these landowners like to do. But one question I had for the grants, are you allowed to use that grant money towards site acquisition or easements to pay these landowners to get a cost per acreage?
Yeah, so some of our FEMA grants can be used for home acquisition or buyouts, right? And so a requirement of that is to help hold the land in some type of open space that follows our requirements in perpetuity. So that's certainly a big component of our annual programs and our hazard mitigation grant program. We've seen a lot of buyouts and a lot of pros and cons of that process. So you certainly have to have homeowners who are on board. You know, you have to have a local and a state government who are on board with administering those grants. They tend to be a longer process, which can be very frustrating, understandably, for folks. But that's certainly a increasingly big part of our where a lot of our money has gone historically, and increasingly where there's a lot of interest. So it can't be open space just for open space. It has to have that risk reduction, hazard mitigation component. But that's certainly an eligible project activity.
I think that's great to know. That's our biggest challenge is mitigation bankers and trying to apply these projects. You know, if a portion of that could be towards that, but you know, as we all know, with real estate and economy right now, the cost of land has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really trying to figure out, is that enough grant money to be able to get these landowners on board? And that's where I truly come back to education and teaching them the benefits, that it's not about money, it's about protecting your land, it's about, you know, public health, it's about recreation, and what could we do for these communities for a better quality of life.
I think it's also about getting our regulators on board as well. One of the questions I had was in implementing coastal mitigation projects, have you seen regulatory agencies recognize the added resilient benefits of these projects? So
so to be upfront about it, right? So we're a business, right? Mitigation banking is a business, and you know, we're in the business of reducing our risk generally, right? That's our objective, and but we're willing on doing more, but there needs to be, so right now we're basically limited, that the agencies do view our industry as, hey, y'all are out there and y'all making money, and you know, so we have that limitation. But if there could be some kind of joint where we are making our money off of the part that we're doing, but we can do more, right, if we have access to additional monies that can be incorporated into our project, and that as long as the agencies would be able to view it as, we're doing this portion of this project for this benefit, and we're doing this other portion for our economic gain benefit, right? So, you know, it's just, we're not viewed as just looking out and just trying to do what's best for our own financial. There's other ways, right? We can build and partner on those kind of projects.
I think increasingly for federal grants like our BRIC program, there's points awarded for partnerships and how you're leveraging partnerships and how you're bringing different partners or different communities to the table. So I think increasingly we're trying to look at that from the federal perspective too. How can we be a catalyst to leverage creative hazard mitigation projects, working with different kinds of partners or nonprofits or local organizations that historically the emergency management community has not connected with before. So I think we're certainly trying to recognize that, at least at FEMA as well.
does anybody have the time? 5 till. So we have about 5 more minutes? Anybody else? I want to get any other audience responses or comments or questions. Anybody else have anything they want to add? And he just saved me from falling off the stage, by the way.
Straight up fear.
So, the HMGP post-fire grant, are you looking, what sort of nature-based solution are you looking at for that?
Yeah, so HMGP post-fire is just, it's basically exactly the same as our hazard mitigation grant program, so all the same activities are eligible. It's just triggered by a fire, an FMAG grant, a fire, I always forget what it is.
Man, government acronyms.
I
We'll
know,
get you.
government acronyms kill you. Fire mitigation assessment grant? Something like that. So it's essentially, it's a different funding mechanism that FEMA has, so it's not a disaster declaration, but it's we know there's a wildfire, we give funds out more quickly to try to, mitigate and contain that fire before it becomes a disaster. So historically, our hazard mitigation grant program was only triggered if you had a disaster. In 2018, through the Disaster Reduction Reform Act, they added this additional mechanism to trigger hazard mitigation grant program funding. And so HMGP post-fire doesn't actually have to just be used for fire mitigation activities. It can be used statewide. It's just triggered by the FMAG grant instead of a disaster. That said, with the growing the increase in wildfires and the destruction that we're seeing, I think the question of how do we mitigate wildfire is a big one for FEMA, as well as many other agencies and organizations. And so for nature-based solutions, we're definitely considering defensible space as a nature-based solution, and planting fire-resistant or traditional plantings as a nature-based solution. Replacing more fire-prone materials with resistant plantings as a nature-based solution. It's kind of a hard space to be in, right? Because on the one hand, like reducing flammable vegetation is not a nature-based solution, right? You're removing vegetation, but I think there are some nature-based solutions we're considering in the wildfire space, but it's challenging. I think as a whole, as an agency, we're wrestling with what are effective hazard mitigation techniques for wildfire in general.
So prescribed burning is probably one of the best ones.
Yes, and that is not an eligible activity for our programs.
Which is too bad, because if they were burned on the right intervals, there wouldn't be the vegetative buildup. There wouldn't be, palmetto, for example, has a lot of volatile oils in it. So if it's kept low, you don't have the same amount of volatile oils. And that's really too bad. Tom McGuire ran a panel on prescribed burning, and they talked exactly about that. So at some point, I'm hoping FEMA can look at maybe management of conservation or mitigation lands appropriately with fire as an actual hazard reduction, because that's what it's, or landowners incentivizing ag landowners or forestry landowners to burn at enough of a, to burn at the right intervals so that that hazard isn't there, and they're providing a buffer. Well, Christy, dies from smoke inhalation. Yeah.
I believe so, yeah. So we've definitely had, goats are a common hazard mitigation method that we've seen is very cost effective and is eligible under our programs. Yeah.
Interesting that
Yes.
that's allowed, but prescribed burns are not.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think prescribed burns, there's can be such danger of potential risk that it's
That's not
supported.
true.
Oh,
Tom, Mr. McGuire actually showed, there was an actuarial study, there was less than, out of 88,000 prescribed burns, there was less than 0.5% that actually got out of control. Less than 0.5% out of 88,000 prescribed burns for burn permits that the Department of, that were issued by the Florida Department of Forestry.
Well, that certainly might be something that, again, wildfire is a big space, and that's a lot of our new legislation and new authority that FEMA is receiving is all in the fire space from Congress. So we're getting a very clear indication that this is a growing concern. This is a priority for for leadership and for FEMA. So, you know, that.
Yeah, prescribed fire, not wildfire.
Correct, yeah.
But prescribed, prescribed.
So, mhm.
There's a lot of bases and sort of places where they burn at regular intervals. There's one in Pennsylvania, Fort Indiantown Gap, that I did some work on. I wonder what their analysis is for risk associated with doing that. Since they are also a federal entity, you might be able to find some common ground as far as the hoops that they have to go through in order to do that.
Yeah,
but they're also a federal group that they burn regularly. I mean, they're shooting, they're lighting with a helicopter.
Yeah.
So they're doing it all. So maybe that'd be my next step there on how to start to open up that conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
So I think we're out of time. I think we went over, and I really thank everybody for staying. I thought this was a very exciting conversation for us anyway. I hope it was exciting for you. I didn't see anybody falling asleep, so that's a good sign. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate your participation, and Christy and Aaron and everybody, thank you so much. Christy, thank you for your 3D presentation. That was awesome. And being willing to take the risk to kind of like do that in a public space without knowing how it was going to come off. So thank you all, and enjoy the conference. And I hope we inspired you, and will encourage you and incentivize you to find more ways to work together. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you.